morning. Oh gosh. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Hi. Good morning. Good morning. Chara. Hello. Welcome. Welcome. How are you doing today, lovely Floofle? How are you doing today? Thank you for being here. Yeet. Yeet indeed. Yeet indeed. Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Oh, it's a kind of midday. It's very gloomy. It's very like cloudy with hints of rain that's coming. I can already feel it. I can feel it in my kitty bones. How are you all doing today, lovelies? I am doing well. I'm tired. My voice is back. My voice is back. I was going to do the story time yesterday. However, after doing 2 streams on Tuesday, my voice was kind of going, and I was like, oh no. And yesterday my voice was cracking and very rough and gravelly, so it was like, oh no, I should probably rest. So that way I can read through this whole story, because we are going to be finishing the Night Circus today. Yes, we are finishing the Night Circus. It is such a lovely story. I've been enjoying the story way too much. I'm so eager to read it every story time. So instead of playing a game today, I think I will save the game for another day, because we were going to play another game called Anne. It's another RPG Maker game. I believe it's an RPG Maker horror game. I'm going to save it for another day. I think we'll play it after we play the Boogeyman. We are getting close to the end of the Boogeyman 2, which we'll be playing tomorrow. It will be a lot of fun. I am because I just woke up not that long ago. I was stuffing a piece of banana bread in my mouth because I made some banana bread yesterday. I made 2 slices for myself, but I can only eat 1. I'm not very hungry. So, yes, the Boogerman. Yes, the Boogerman. I am excited to finish the Boogeyman tomorrow. We might finish it tomorrow. I'm not sure. There's a lot left. There's a lot of game left. We still have to find our wife that wants to divorce us. So yeah, it's just a matter of I don't know, figuring out whatever leftover puzzles there are. There's a lot of puzzles left over, so I don't know if we're going to be finishing the Boogeyman tomorrow, but we are getting close to the end. I can feel it in my bones. Good morning, Wasabi. How are you doing today? How are you doing today, friend? I'm so happy to see you here. But we're continuing today with the Night Circus. Last time we left off, a prominent character had passed away. Another prominent character had passed away. Celia and Marco hooked up, only to have themselves break up because of the context of their challenge, which is very unfortunate. I'm good. How are you? I'm a lot better. I felt the tickle in my throat yesterday. I thought I was losing my voice. I definitely was losing my voice by the end of Tuesday when I was doing the Valentine's Day stream. Because I had done 2 streams that day, my voice was like done. I don't talk a lot on a normal day. So for me, doing like a 2.5, 3 hour stream, and then doing another 2 hour stream directly after, I really tired up my voice, and I spent all day today recovering because it was still a little bit gravelly and rough and cracking. So today I'm a lot better. I'm still, I still got the bit of graveliness in my voice, but I can at least speak. Yesterday was kind of like croaking. It was terrible. Not my mom. I don't have a mom. My creator. Where did mom come from? I don't have a mom. I don't have a mom. I wish I had a mom. I don't have a mom. My creator. My creator was concerned that I was getting sick, and I was like, no, it's just a strain. It's just strain. My mom. What did I say? Wishful thinking, I think. I had a dream, I guess, that I had a mom last night. I did have a dream that I had a mom last night. She was that mom from like that anime where I can never remember the name of the anime. It's so long. It's that mom from the anime where she gets isekai to her son, and she has like super high level power, and she just kicks ass very effortlessly. I forgot the name of that anime. Oh my god, that's gonna kill me. But yeah, that was basically her. My mom was like a super OP isekai kick ass mom. And that was my dream. I was like, I wish I had a mom. Naruto? Is that what it's called? I don't remember. It was something like something my mom's like super high level. I don't know, something like that. like the English title for it. I don't remember. I need an oil change? Probably. If only I could get an oil change. But, I don't know. Maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? No. Nah. I like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, though. I'm very nostalgic for the 90s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I love it. Alright, but let's get back into the story. Let's get into the story. I hope you are ready to enjoy the story. We're going to be finishing it today, so the stream might be a little longer than normal. So, let's go. Just double check the sound settings real quick. The live action movie where they go back in time was the best one. Yeah, right? Was there one like that? I like the live action movies, the old ones, like the ones from like the 80s and 90s. You know, with those Jim Henson puppet suits. Those were great. Was it Michael Bay that made the live action ones? That was terrifying. Those were terrifying. Those were like way too real. But the old school ones with like the Muppet bodies, that was great. I love those. Sarah, welcome. You are not late. We're just doing some pre-story time banter. You are perfectly on time. Sarah. How are you doing today, lovely? You are so beautiful today. All of you are so beautiful and lovely today, I have to say. I'm in such a great mood, but it's also very cloudy, so I'm very low energy today. It's gonna rain. It's actually quite warm today. It's gonna be like a high of 62 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be, I don't know how much in Celsius. How much is that in Celsius? Hey Google. How much is 62 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius? 16 degrees. Okay, got it. Thank you. Like 16, 17 degrees today. So it's gonna be, it's a warm day. Spring is slowly approaching. Spring is slowly approaching my little corner of the world, so it is very, very, very warm today. Which I'm not used to, because then it's gonna drop to being very, very cold very soon. But the next 3 days are gonna be warm. 16, that's kind of cold. It's like 62 degrees. It's better than what we've had recently. It's been very mild weather. It's not so cold. 16 degrees Celsius. Is that right? 16. Yep. It's mild. It's not very cold. It's quite mild. It doesn't get like the summers get really hot here, but not so hot that it's like uncomfortable. I don't do well in heat, so. I don't do well in heat. No, I don't do well in heat, so it's like, for me, I get very warm very quickly. I'm very much a winter cat. I am very warm. I usually just wear jumpers and light jackets, during my time. 16 C's, jumper weather here. It's sweater weather here too, but, it's really more like, I'm a very hot running person. So for me, it's more like I am going to be going outside in just a t-shirt or a light long sleeve. Maybe have a light jacket on me if it cools down, but I'm very much a hot running person. So winter is never a problem for me. I like being cold because it's refreshing. Summertime is when I am dying and I'm like, ugh. Should move to the tundra? Probably, Wasabi, probably. I'm just a very, very hot running person. My friends use me as a space heater when it's cold in the winter. And they'll be like, huddle up next to me, be like, yo, you're warm. And I'm like, I am hot. Please get the hell off of me. Your body heat is just adding to my own. It's problematic, but it's also very useful in cold weather. Excuse me. My stomach feels full. I made banana bread yesterday. I cooked a lot yesterday. I was making a big meal because some of the assistants stayed over for dinner. So I made like chicken. So I made some breaded chicken cutlets. I made veggies. I made mashed potatoes. I made a lot of food. And I made banana bread for dessert because my banana bread tends to be on the sweet side. So it was a nice little sweet dessert to have with coffee afterwards. And I have some banana bread for breakfast this morning. I made the mistake of cutting 2 slices of banana bread. Ugh. My stomach. I ate 1 slice and I'm already very full. Ugh, my stomach. Mashed potatoes. Yeah, I make my mashed potatoes with butter, cream, and cheese. Like shredded fresh cheese. Ugh, so good. It's such a good, yummy, it's so yummy. Cheesy mashed potatoes are delicious. Very, very yummy. To have with like chicken or steak or something. It's very yummy. And then of course I had like sauteed veggies and garlic and butter and some boiled corn. I made boiled corn. I'm not a fan of corn. I don't like how it gets stuck in my teeth. But it was delicious. Yeah, I did say get that string when I scoop. I wanna make aligo. Aligo is these super cheesy mashed potatoes that's just so much cheese in it that it stretches. And I'm like, when you scoop it, it's just very stretchy mashed potatoes. I'm like, I want to get to that level of cheesiness in my potatoes one day. One day I'm just gonna buy a big old thing of cheese, and I'm just gonna go crazy, and I'm gonna make aligo, and it's gonna be so rich and so cheesy and so potatoey. I'm excited to one day to do that with a nice steak. Ugh. And then a side of veggies. Delicious, delicious. I can't be getting off topic. Hold on. And I feel chatty today. I want to read the story, but I also feel very chatty. That's the conundrum of a VTuber. Wanting to do one thing and then wanting to do another. But yes, let's get into it. Let's get into the story. If I talk about food, we'll be here all day. Charming but deadly. You follow the sound of a flute. Controversial but diced onion and mashed potatoes is nice. It is. Texturally, it freaks me out, but I understand the flavor. It's delicious. I usually use like powdered onion powder rather, or garlic powder. Unless I boil the garlic with my mashed potatoes. I don't normally put in garlic. Or I have to like roast my garlic to make it really soft and put it into my mashed potatoes. That's delicious. Okay, wait. Okay, story time. Let's get it. Told you, I'll be here all day if we talk food. We'll be here all day because I'm such a foodie. I love food. But we'll be here all day if we start talking food. Okay. Charming but deadly. You follow the sound of a flute into a hidden corner. The hypnotic melody beckoning you closer. Seated on the ground, nestled in an alcove on striped silk pillows, are two women. One plays the flute you heard. A burning coil of incense sits between them, along with a large black-lidded basket. A small audience is gathering. The other woman carefully removes the lid from the basket before taking out a flute of her own and adding a counter melody to the first. Two white cobras coil around each other as they rise from the woven basket, in perfect time with the music. For a moment they seem to be one snake and not two, and then they separate again, moving down along the sides of the basket, gliding onto the ground quite close to your feet. The snakes move back and forth together, in motions resembling a strikingly formal dance, elegant and graceful. The music increases in tempo, and now there is something harsher about the way the snakes move. Waltz morphs into battle. They circle each other, and you wish for one or the other to strike. One of them hisses softly, and the other responds in kind. They continue to circle as the music and the incense rise to the starry sky above. You cannot tell which snake strikes first. They are identical after all. As they rear and hiss and jump at each other, you are distracted by the fact that they are both no longer stark white, but a perfect ebony black. Precognition. En route from Boston to New York, October 31st, 1902. Most of the train's passengers have settled into their respective cars and compartments to read or sleep or otherwise pass the journey. Corridors that were bustling with people at departure time are now nearly empty as Poppet and Widget make their way from car to car quietly as cats. Tags hang by each compartment door, marked with handwritten names. They stop at the one that reads C. Bowen, and Widget lifts her hands and knocks softly on the frosted glass. "Come in," calls a voice from inside, and Poppet slides the door open. "Are we interrupting anything?" she asks. "No," Celia says. "Do come in." She closes the symbol-filled book that she has been reading and places it on the table. The entire compartment looks like an explosion in a library. piles of books and papers amongst the velvet-covered benches and polished wood tables. Excuse me. Oh, bye. Excuse me. Let's see. The light dances around the room with the motion of the train, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. Widget slides the door closed behind them and latches it. Would you like some tea? Celia asks. No, thank you, Poppet says. She looks nervously at Widget, who only nods. Celia watches both of them, Poppet biting her lip and refusing to meet Celia's eyes while Widget leans against the door. Out with it, she says. Poppet starts. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Celia asks, moving piles of books so they could sit on the violet benches, but the twins both remain where they are. I think something that was supposed to happen didn't happen, Poppet says. And what might that be? Celia asks. Our friend Bailey was supposed to come with us. Ah, yes. Widget mentioned something about that. Celia says. I take it he did not. No, Poppet says. We waited for him, but he didn't come. But I don't know if that's because he didn't want to or because we left early. I see, Celia says. It seems a very big decision to me, deciding whether or not to run away and join the circus. Perhaps he did not have enough time to properly consider it. But he was supposed to come, Poppet says. I know he was supposed to come. Did you see something? Celia asks. Sort of. How does one sort of see something? It's not as clear as it was before, Poppet says. I can't see anything as clearly as I used to. It's all bits and pieces that don't make sense. Nothing here has made any sense for a year, and you know it. I think that's an exaggeration, but I understand how it could seem that way, Celia says. It's not an exaggeration, Poppet says, raising her voice. The chandeliers begin to shudder, and Celia closes her eyes, taking a deep breath and waiting for them to return to a gentle sway before she speaks. Poppet, there is no one here who is more upset by what happened last year than I am. And I have told you before it is not your fault, and there is nothing that you could have done to prevent it. Not by you, not by me, not by anyone else. Do you understand that? Yes, Poppet says. But what's the use of seeing the future if I can't do anything to stop it? You cannot stop things, Celia said. You can only be prepared for them to happen. You could stop them, Poppet mumbles, looking around at the multitude of books. Celia puts a finger under Poppet's chin and turns her head to look her in the eye. Only a handful of people on this train have any idea how integral I am to the running of the circus, she says. And as much as you two are amongst them, and you are both extremely clever, you do not comprehend the scope of what goes on here, and you wouldn't particularly like it if you did. Now tell me what you sort of saw. Poppet closes her eyes, trying to concentrate. I don't know, she says. It was bright. Everything's on fire, and Bailey was there. You're going to have to do better than that, Celia says. I can't, Poppet says. I haven't seen anything clearly since before, and that's likely because you don't want to see anything clearly after that. And I can't say I blame you, but if you want me to do something to prevent whatever this is, I'm going to need more information. She unclasps the long silver chain that hangs around her neck, checking the time on the pocket watch that hangs from her before she holds it up in front of Poppet. Before she holds it up in front of Poppet's eyes. Please, Poppet, Celia says. You don't need the stars for this. Just focus, even if you don't want to. Poppet frowns, then turns her attention to the dangling silver watch as it sways in the warm light. Her eyes narrow, focusing on the reflection in the curve of the watch, and then they soften, looking at something beyond the watch, beyond the train. She starts to sway as her eyes flutter close, and she falls backwards. Widget leaps forward to catch her before she hits the floor. Celia helps him move Poppet to one of the velvet benches by the table, while on a nearby shelf a cup of tea pours itself, steaming and brewing instantly in a flowered china cup. Poppet blinks, looking up at the chandeliers as though seeing them for the first time, before turning back to Celia to accept the cup of tea. That hurt, Poppet says. I'm sorry, dearest, Celia says. I think your sight is getting stronger, which makes it even more troublesome for you to be suppressing it. Puppet nods, rubbing her temples. Tell me everything you saw, Celia says. Everything. I don't care if it doesn't make sense. Try to describe it. Puppet looks into her tea before she starts. There's a fire, she says. It starts with the bonfire, but bigger, and there's nothing containing it. Like the whole courtyard is on fire. There's a loud noise, and this heat, and... Puppet pauses, closing her eyes as she attempts to concentrate on the images in her head. She opens her eyes and looks back at Celia. You're there. You're with someone else, and I think it's raining. And then you're not there anymore, but you still are. I can't explain it. And then Bailey is there. Not during the fire, but after, I think. What did the someone else look like? Celia asks. A man. He was tall. In a suit with a bowler hat, I think. It was hard to tell. Celia rests her head in her hands for a moment before she speaks. If that's who I think it is, I know for a fact he's in London at the moment, so perhaps this is not as immediate as you think. But it is, I'm sure of it, Puppet protests. Timing has never been your strong point. You said yourself that this friend of yours is also present for this incident, and your first complaint was that he's not here. This might not happen for weeks, months, or years, Pet. But we have to do something, Puppet says, slamming her teacup down on the table. The tea stops before it splashes onto an open book as though there is an invisible wall surrounding it. To be prepared, like you said. I will do what I can to prevent the circus from going up in smoke. I shall fireproof it as much as possible. Is that enough for now? After a moment, Puppet nods. Good, Celia says. We'll be off the train in a matter of hours. We can discuss this more later. Wait, Widget says. He has been sitting back on the back of one of the velvet benches, staying out of the conversation. Now he turns to Celia. I have a question before you shoo us away. What is it? She asks. You said we don't comprehend the scope of what's going on here, he says. That was likely not the best choice of words. It's a game, isn't it? Widget asks. Celia looks at him, a slow, sad smile tugging at her lips. It took you 16 years to figure that one out, she says. I expected more from you, Widge. I guess that's much for a while, he says. It's not easy to see things you don't want me to know, but I've been picking up bits of it lately. You haven't been as guarded as usual. A game? Puppet asks, looking back and forth between her brother and Celia. Like a chess game, Widget says. The circus is the board. Not exactly, Celia says. It's not as straightforward as chess. We're all playing a game? Puppet asks. Not us, Widget says. Her and someone else. The rest of us are like, what, extra pieces? It's not like that, Celia says. Then what is it like? Widget asks. In response, Celia only looks at him, staring directly into his eyes without wavering. Widget returns her gaze silently for some time while Puppet watches them curiously. Eventually, Widget blinks, the surprise evident on his face. Then he looks down at his shoes. Celia sighs, and when she speaks, she addresses them both. If I had not been completely honest with you, it is only because I know a great deal of things that you do not want to know. I'm going to ask that you trust me when I tell you I am trying to make things better. It is an extremely delicate balance, and there are a great deal many factors involved. The best we can do right now is take everything as it comes, and not worry ourselves over things that have happened or things that are to come. Agreed? Widget nods, and Puppet reluctantly follows suit. Thank you, Celia says. Now please, go and try to get some rest. Puppet gives her an embrace before slipping out the door back into the hall. Widget lingers a moment. I'm sorry, he says. You have nothing to be sorry about, Celia tells him. I'm sorry anyway. He kisses her on the cheek before he leaves, not waiting for her to reply. What was that about? Poppet asks when Widget joins her in the hall. She let me read her, Widget says. All of her, without concealing anything. She's never done that before. He refuses to elaborate as they walk quietly back down the length of the train. What do you think we should do? Poppet asks once they reach their car, a marmalade cat crawling onto her lap. I think we should wait, Widget says. I think that's all we can do right now. Alone in her book-filled chamber, Celia begins tearing her handkerchief into strips. One at a time, she drops each scrap of silk and lace into an empty teacup and lights it on fire. She repeats this process over and over, working until the cloth burns without charring, raining bright and white within the flame. Pursuit. En route from Boston to New York, November 1st, 1902. It is a cold morning, and Bailey's faded gray coat does not look particularly elegant paired with his new charcoal suit. He is not entirely certain the two shades are complementary, but the streets and the train station are too busy for him to worry much about his appearance. There are other reviewers headed to New York, but they ended up getting tickets for a later train, so there is a round of farewells and the confusion of sorting dozens of bags before they manage to board. The journey is slow, and Bailey sits staring out the window at the changing landscape, absently gnawing at his fingernails. Excuse me. Victor comes to sit by him, a red leather-bound book in his hands. I thought you might like something to read to pass the time, he says, as he gives the book to Bailey. Bailey opens the cover and glances through the book, which he is surprised to see is a meticulously organized scrapbook. Most of the black pages are filled with articles clipped from newspapers, but there are also handwritten letters, the dates ranging from only a few years previous to more than a decade ago. Not all of it is in English, Victor explains, but you should be able to read most of the articles at least. Thank you, Bailey says. Victor nods and returns to his seat across the car. As the train chugs on, Bailey forgets the landscape entirely. He reads and rereads the words of Herr Friedrich Thyssen, finding them both familiar and entrancing. I have never seen you take such a sudden interest in a new revere, he overhears Lorena remark to her brother. Especially not to the point of sharing your books. He reminds me of Frederick, is Victor's only reply. They are almost to New York when Elizabeth takes the empty seat opposite him. Bailey notes his place in the middle of an article that is comparing the interplay of light and shadow in a particular tent to an Indonesian puppet theater before putting the book down. We lead strange lives, chasing our dreams and run from place to place, Elizabeth says quietly, looking out the window. I have never met so young a revere who clearly feels as strongly towards the circus as those of us who have been following it for years. I want you to have this. She hands him a red wool scarf, the one she has been knitting on and off. It is longer than Bailey expected from watching her knit, with intricate patterns of knotted cables at each end. I can't accept this, he says, part of him deeply honored and the other part wishing people would stop giving him things. Nonsense, Elizabeth says. I make them all the time. I am at no loss for yarn. I started with this one with no particular revere in mind to wear it, so clearly it is meant for you. Thank you, Bailey says, wrapping the scarf around his neck despite the warmth of the train. You are quite welcome, Elizabeth says. We should be arriving soon enough, and then it will only be a matter of waiting for the sun to set. She leaves him in the seat by the window. Bailey stares out at the gray sky with a mixture of comfort and excitement and nervousness that he cannot reconcile. When they arrive in New York, Bailey is immediately struck by how strange everything looks. Though it is not different from Boston. Boston has some passing familiarity. Now, without the comforting lulls of the train, it strikes him how very far he is from home. Victor and Lorena seem equally discombobulated, but Elizabeth is on familiar ground. She ushers him through intersections and herds them onto streetcars until Bailey begins to feel like one of his sheep. But it does not take long for them to reach their destination, a spot outside the city proper where they are to meet up with another local reviewer named August, the same whose room Bailey had inherited in Boston, who has graciously invited them to stay with him at his home until they can find rooms elsewhere. August turns out to be a pleasant, heavy-set fellow, and Bailey's first impression is that he resembles his house. A squat sort of building with a porch wrapping around the front, warm and welcoming. He practically lifts Elizabeth off the ground in greeting and shakes hands so enthusiastically while being introduced to Bailey that his fingers are sore afterwards. I have good news and bad news, August says as he helps them lift their bags onto the porch. Which should come first? The good, Elizabeth answers before Bailey had time to consider which would be preferable. We have traveled too long to be met with bad news straight off. The good news, August says, is that I was indeed correct in predicting the exact location, and Le Cirque has set up less than a mile away. You can see the tents from the end of the porch if you lean properly. He points down the left side of the porch where he stands on the stairs. Bailey rushes to the end of the porch where Lorraine are close on his heels. The top of the striped tents are visible through the trees some distance away, a bright punch of white against the gray sky and brown trees. Wonderful, Elizabeth says, laughing at Lorena and Bailey as they lean over the railing. And what's the bad news then? I'm not certain it is bad news precisely, August says, as though he is not sure how to explain. Perhaps it is more disappointing, really, regarding the circus. Bailey steps down from the railing and turns back to the conversation, all the elation he had felt moments before draining away. Disappointing? Victor asks. Well, the weather is not ideal, as I'm certain you've noticed, August says, gesturing up at the heavy gray clouds. We had quite the storm last night. The circus was closed, of course, which was odd to begin with, as in all my time I have never seen it set up only to be closed the first night for inclement weather. Regardless, there was some sort of... I don't even know what to call it. A noise of some sort around midnight. A crashing sound that practically shook the house. I thought perhaps something had been struck by lightning. There was a great deal of smoke over the circus, and one of the neighbors swore he saw a flash of light bright as day. I took a walk down there this morning, and nothing appears to be amiss, though the closure sign is still up on the gate. How strange, Lorena remarks. Without a word, Bailey leaps over the porch railing and takes off in a full run through the trees. He heads towards the striped tent as fast as he can, his red scarf trailing out behind him. Old Ghosts, London, October 31st, 1902. It is late and the pavement is dark despite the street lamps dotting the lines of grey stone buildings. Isabel stands near the shadowed stairs of the one she called home for almost a year, what now seems like a lifetime ago. She waits outside for Marco to return, a pale blue shawl pulled around her shoulders like a patch of day-bright sky in the night. Hours pass before Marco appears at the corner. His grip on his briefcase tightens when he sees her. What are you doing here? He asks. You're supposed to be in the States. I left the circus, Isabel says. I walked away. Celia said I could. She takes a faded scrap of paper from her pocket, bearing her name, her real name that he coaxed from her years ago and asked her to write in one of his notebooks. Of course she did, Marco says. May I come upstairs? She asks, fidgeting with the edge of her shawl. No, Marco says, glancing up at the window. A dim, flickering light just illuminates the glass. Please, just say whatever it is you hear to say. Isabel frowns. She looks around the street, but it is dark and empty. Only a crisp breeze blowing through, rustling the leaves in the gutter. I want to say that I was sorry, she says quietly, for not telling you I was tempering. I know what happened last year was partially my fault. You should apologize to Celia, not to me. I already have, Isabel says. I knew she was in love with someone, but I thought it was Herr Thyssen. I didn't realize until that night that it was you. But she loved him as well, and she lost him, and I was the cause. It was not your fault, Marco says. There were a great many factors involved. There have always been a great many factors involved, Isabel says. I didn't mean to get so tangled up in this. I only wanted to be helpful. I wanted to get through this and go back to the way things were before. We cannot go backwards, Marco says. A great deal is not how it used to be. I know, Isabel says. I cannot hate her. I've tried. I cannot even dislike her. She let me carry on for years, clearly suspicious of her, but she was always kind to me. And I loved the circus. I felt like I finally had a home, a place I could belong. After a while, I didn't feel like I needed to protect you from her. I felt I should protect everyone else from both of you, and both of you from each other. I started after you came to see me in Paris, when you were upset about the wishing tree. But I knew I had to continue after I read Celia's cards. When was this? Marco asks. That night in Prague, when you were supposed to meet me, Isabel says. You never let me read for you, not even a single card before last year. I had not realized that before. I wonder if I would have let this opportunity... I wonder if I would have let this go on so long if I had the opportunity. It took ages for me to truly understand what her cards were saying. I could not see what was right in front of me. I wasted so much time. This was always about the two of you, even before you met. I was only a diversion. You were not a diversion, Marco says. Did you ever love me? Isabel asks. No, Marco admits. I thought perhaps I could, but... Isabel nods. I thought you did, she says. I was so certain that you did, even though you never said it. I couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what I wanted to be real. I thought this was going to be temporary, even when it kept dragging on and on. But it's not. It never was. I was the one who was temporary. I used to think that if she were gone, you would come back to me. If she were gone, I would be nothing, Marco says. You should think better of yourself than to settle for that. They stand in silence on the empty street, the chill of the night air falling between them. Good night, Miss Martin, Marco says, staring up at the stairs. The most difficult thing to read is time, Isabel says, and Marco stops, turning back to her. Maybe because it changes so many things. I have read for countless people on innumerable subjects, and the most difficult thing to understand within the cards is always the timing. I knew that, and it still surprised me. How long was I willing to wait for something that was only a possibility? I always thought it was just a matter of time, but I was wrong. I did not expect this to go on as long as Marco begins, but Isabel interrupts him. It was all a matter of timing, she says. My train was late that day. The day I saw you drop your notebook. Had it been on schedule, we would never have met. Maybe we were never meant to. It was a possibility, one of thousands, and not inevitable, the way some things are. Isabel, I am sorry, Marco says. I am sorry that I involved you in all of this. I am sorry that I did not tell you sooner how I feel for Celia. I do not know what else you want from me that I can give you. Isabel nods, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I read for someone a week ago, she says. He was young, younger than I was when I met you. Tall in the way of someone who was not yet used to being tall. He was genuine and sweet. He even asked me my name. And everything was in his cards. Everything. It was like reading for the circus. And that only happened to me once when I read for Celia. Why are you telling me this? Marco asks. Because I thought he could have saved you. I didn't know how to feel about that. I still don't. It was there in his cards along with everything else, as plain as anything I have ever seen. I thought that this was going to end differently. I was wrong. I seem to be wrong quite frequently. Perhaps it is time for me to find a new occupation. Marco stops, his face going pale in the lamplight. What are you saying? He asks. I am saying that you had a chance, Isabel says. A chance to be with her. A chance for everything to resolve itself in a favorable manner. I almost wanted that for you, truly, in spite of everything. I still want you to be happy, and the possibility was there. She gives him a small, sad smile as she slides her hand into her pocket. But the timing isn't right. She removes her hand from the pocket and uncurls her fingers. In her palm sits a pile of sparkling black crystals, silt as fine as ash. What is that? Marco asks as he lifts her palm to her lips. In response, Isabel blows softly, and the ash flies at Marco in a stinging black cloud. When the dust clears, Marco's briefcase sits abandoned on the pavement by her feet. Isabel takes it with her as she leaves. Aftermath, New York, November 1st, 1902. Though the surroundings have changed, the circus looks exactly the same as it did in his own fields, Bailey thinks when he finally reaches the fence, holding a stitch in his side and breathing heavily from running through an area that is more wood than fields. But something more than that is different. It takes him a moment of trying to catch his breath by the side of the gates, staring at the sign that reads, "Closed due to inclement weather," hanging over the normal sign denoting the hours of operation. It is the smell, he realizes. It is not the smell of caramel blending perfectly with the woody smoke of a warming fire. Instead, it is the heavy scent of something burning and wet with a sickly sweet undertone. It makes him nauseous. There is no sound within the bounds of the curling iron fence. The tents are perfectly still. Only the clock beyond the gate makes any motion, slowly ticking by the afternoon hours. Bailey discovers quickly that he is not able to slip through the bars of the fence as easily as he did when he was 10. The space is too narrow, no matter how he tries to shift his shoulders. He half expected Papa to be there waiting for him, but there is no soul in sight. The fence is too high to climb, and Bailey is considered simply sitting in front of the gates until sundown when he spots a curving tree branch that does not quite reach the fence but comes close, hanging above the twisted iron spikes at the top. From there he could jump. If he got the angle right, he would land in a path between tents. If he got the angle wrong, he would probably likely break his leg, but that would only be a minor problem that he could be dealt with. Then at least he would be inside the circus. The tree is easy enough to climb, and the limb closest to the circus wide enough to manage until he gets close to the fence. But he is unable to balance well, and while he attempts a graceful leap, it ends up being something closer to a planned fall. He lands heavily in the path, rolling into the side of the tent and taking a large amount of the white powder on the ground with him. His legs hurt, but he seems to be in working order, though his shoulder feels badly bruised and the palms of his hands are messes of scrapes and dirt powder. The powder brushes off his hands easily enough, but sticks like paint to his coat and the legs of his new suit. And now he stands alone inside the circus again. Hi, Chara! How are you doing today? I hope you're enjoying the story. We're doing a story time today, so I'm hoping you're enjoying the story. And now he stands alone inside the circus again. Truth or dare, he mutters to himself. You're sad? I'm so sorry that you're sad. I'm so sorry. I hope you feel better. Try to relax and focus on the story. Try to get you out of your headspace and just relax. Listen to the soft music. Listen to the story. Just try to get your mind off the sad things. Okay? I'm sorry that you're feeling sad. I do hope you feel better. Dry, fragile leaves dance around his feet, drawn in through the fence by the wind. Spots of muted autumn colors disrupt the black and white. Bailey is not certain where to go. He wanders through the path, expecting to see Poppet around every corner, but he is met with only stripes and emptiness. Finally heads towards the courtyard, towards the bonfire. As he turns a corner that opens up into the wide space of the bonfire courtyard, he is more surprised by the fact that the fire is not burning than he is to find that there is indeed someone waiting for him. But the figure standing by the cauldron of the curling iron is not Poppet. This woman is too short, her hair too dark. When she turns, she has a long silver cigarette holder at her lips, and the smoke curls around her head like snakes. It takes him a moment to recognize the contortionist, having only ever seen her upon a platform blending herself into impossible shapes. You are Bailey, yes? She says. Yes, Bailey answers, wondering if absolutely everyone in the circus knows who he is. You are late, the contortionist tells him. Late for what? Bailey asks, confused. I doubt she will be able to hold on much longer. Who? Bailey asks, though the thought pops into his head that the contortionist might be referring to the circus itself. And of course, she continues, had you arrived earlier, it might have played out differently. Timing is a sensitive thing. Where's Poppet? Bailey asks. Miss Penelope is indisposed at the moment. How can she not know that I'm here? She might very well know you are here, that does not change the fact that she is, as I've mentioned, indisposed at the moment. Who are you? Bailey asks. His shoulder is throbbing now. He cannot quite pinpoint when everything stops making sense. You may call me Tsukiko, the contortionist says. She takes a long drag on her cigarette. Beyond her, the monstrous bowl of the wrought iron curls sit hollow and still. The ground around it, usually painted in a spiral pattern of black and white, is now nothing but darkness, as though it has been swallowed up by empty space. I thought the fire never went out, Bailey says, walking closer to it. It never has before, Tsukiko says. Reaching the edge of the still-hot iron curls, Bailey stands on his tiptoes to peer inside. It is almost filled with rainwater, the dark surface rippling in the breeze. The ground beneath his feet is black and muddy, and when he steps back, he accidentally kicks a black bowler hat. What happened? Bailey asks. That is somewhat difficult to explain, Tsukiko answers. It is a long and complicated story. And you're not going to tell it to me, are you? She tilts her head a bit. Bailey can see the hint of a smile playing around her lips. No, I am not, she says. Great, Bailey mutters under his breath. I see you have taken up the banner, Tsukiko says, pointing her cigarette at his red scarf. Bailey isn't sure how to respond to this, but she continues without waiting for an answer. I suppose you can call it an explosion. The bonfire exploded? How? Remember when I said it was difficult to explain? That has not changed. Why didn't the tents burn? Bailey asks, looking around at the seemingly never-ending stripes. Some of the closer tents are splattered with mud, but none are burning despite the charred ground that surrounds them. That was Miss Bowen's doing, Tsukiko says. I suspect without that precaution there would have been more extensive damage. Who is Miss Bowen? Bailey asks. You ask a lot of questions, Tsukiko responds. You don't answer very many of them, Bailey retaliates. The smile appears in full then, curling up in a manner Bailey finds almost disturbingly friendly. I am only an emissary, Tsukiko says. I am here to act as convoy to escort you to a meeting for a discussion of such matters, I suppose, because at the moment I am the only living person who has any idea of what has transpired, and why you are here. Your questions are better saved for someone else. And who might that be? Bailey asks. You shall see, Tsukiko says. Come this way. She beckons him forward, leading him around the bonfire to the other side of the courtyard. They walk a short way down an adjoining passageway, layers of mud sticking to Bailey's formerly shiny shoes. Here we are. Tsukiko stops at the tent entrance, and Bailey moves closer to check the sign, knowing which tent it is as soon as he glances at the words upon it. Fearsome beasts and strange creatures, wonders in paper and mist. Are you coming with me? Bailey asks. No, Tsukiko says. Only an emissary, remember? I shall be in the courtyard if you need me. With that, she gives him a polite nod and walks back the way they came. And as Bailey watches her go, he notices that the mud is not sticking to her boots. After she disappears around a corner, Bailey enters the tent. Incendiary, New York, October 31st, 1902. Marco's back slams against the ground as though he had been roughly pushed, leaving him coughing both from the impact and the cloud of black ash surrounding him. A light rain is falling as he pulls himself up, and the air around him clears as he sees a row of tiny trees and stars surrounded by silver gears and black and white chess pieces. It takes him a moment to realize that he's standing next to the Wundstrom clock. The clock is ticking towards midnight, the harlequin juggler at the top balancing 11 balls amongst the twinkling stars and moving pieces. The sign announcing the circus's closure due to inclement weather clatters in the wind, though for the moment, the rain is not much more than a heavy mist. Marco rubs the shimmering powder from his face, which has reverted to its true form, and he is too disoriented to change it. He tries to get a better look at the dark ash on his suit, but is already fading away. The striped curtain beyond the ticket booth hangs open, and through the haze, Marco can see a figure standing in the shadows, illuminated by the sharp spark of light from a cigarette lighter. Bonjour, Tsukiko says cheerfully as he approaches, tucking her lighter back in her pocket as she balances her cigarette in its long silver holder. A rush of wind howls across the space, rattling the circus gates. How did she do this? Marcos asks. Isabel, you mean? Tsukiko replies. I taught her that particular trick. I do not think she understood the nuances of it, but it appears she performed it fine regardless. Do you feel unsteady at all? I'm fine, Marco says, though his back is aching from the fall and his eyes still sting. He watches Tsukiko curiously. He has never spoken at any great length with the contortionist, and her presence is almost as confusing as the fact that moments ago he had been somewhere else entirely. Here, come out of the wind at least. Tsukiko motions him into the curtained tunnel with her cigarette-free hand. That is a better face than the other one, she says, scrutinizing his appearance through misted smoke. It suits you. She lets the curtain fall once he has entered, leaving them enclosed in darkness, studded with dimly sparkling lights, the glowing tip of her cigarette the one spot of color amongst the dots of white. Where is everyone? Marco asks, shaking the rain from his bowler hat. Inclement weather party, Tsukiko explains, traditionally held in the acrobat's tent, as it is the largest. But you would not know that, as you are not truly a member of the company, are you? He cannot see her expression well enough to read it, though he can tell she is grinning brightly. No, I suppose I am not, he says. He follows her as she walks through the maze-like tunnels, moving deeper into the circus. Why am I here? We will get to that in due time, she says. How much did Isabel tell you? The conversation with Isabel outside his building is almost lost in Marco's memory, despite it occurring only moments ago. He recalls fleeting pieces of it, nothing coherent enough to articulate. No matter, Tsukiko says when he does not respond immediately. It is sometimes difficult to gather one's senses after such a journey. Did she tell you that we have something in common? Marco recalls Isabel mentioning Celia and someone else, but not who, exactly. No, he says. We are both former students of the same instructor, Tsukiko says. The end of her cigarette glows brighter as she inhales in the near darkness. Temporary cover only, I'm afraid, she adds as they reach another curtain. She pulls it back and the space is flooded with glowing light from the courtyard. She gestures for Marco to step out into the rain, taking a drag from her cigarette as he obediently walks through the open curtain, trying to make sense of her last statement. The lights that adorn the tents are dark, but in the center of the courtyard, the bonfire burns brightly, glowing in white. The soft rain falling around it glistens. It is lovely, Tsukiko says, stepping into the courtyard with him. I will grant you that. You were a former student of Alexander's, Marco asks, not certain he has understood. Tsukiko nods. I tired of writing things in books, so I began inscribing them on my body. Instead, I'm not fond of getting my hands dirty, she says, indicating his ink-stained fingers. I am surprised he agreed to such an open venue for this challenge. He has always preferred seclusion. I suspect he is not pleased with the way it has been progressed. Excuse me. As he listens to her, Marco notices that the contortionist is completely dry. Every drop of rain that falls on her evaporates instantly, sizzling into steam as soon as it touches her. You won the last game, he says. I survived the last game, Tsukiko corrects. When? Marco asks as they walk towards the bonfire. It ended 83 years, 6 months, and 21 days ago. It was a cherry blossom day. Tsukiko takes a long drag from her cigarette before she continues. Our instructors do not understand how it is, she says, to be bound to someone in such a way. They are too old, too out of touch with their emotions. They no longer remember what it is to live and breathe within the world. They think it's simply to pit any two people against each other. It is never simple. The other person becomes how you define your life, how you define yourself. They become as necessary as breathing. Then they expect the victor to continue on without that. It would be like pulling the Murray twins apart and expecting them to be the same. Yet they would be whole but not complete. You love her, do you not? More than anything in the world, Marco says. Tsukiko nods thoughtfully. My opponent's name was Hinata, she says. Her skin smelled of ginger and cream. I loved her more than anything in the world as well. On that cherry blossom day, she set herself on fire, ignited a pillar of flame, and stepped into it as though it were water. I'm sorry, Marco says. Thank you, Tsukiko says, with a shadow of her normally bright smile. It is what Miss Bone is planning to do for you. To let you win. I know. I would not wish such pain on anyone. To be the victor. Hinata would have adored this, she says as they reach the bonfire, watching the flames dance in the increasing rain. She was quite fond of fire. Water has always been my element. Before. She holds out her hand and watches the raindrops refusing to reach her skin. Do you know the story of the wizard in the tree? She asks. The Merlin story? Marco asks. I know several versions. There are many, Tsukiko says with a nod. Old stories have a habit of being told and retold and changed. Each subsequent storyteller puts his or her mark upon it. Whatever truth the story once had is buried in bias and embellishment. The reason does not matter as much as the story itself. The rain continues to increase, falling heavily as she continues. Sometimes it is a cave, but I like the version with the tree. Perhaps a tree is more romantic. She takes the still glowing cigarette from its holder, balancing it gently between her graceful fingers. Well, there are a number of trees here that could be used for this purpose, she says. I thought this might be more appropriate. Marco turns his attention to the bonfire. It illuminates the rain falling over in such a way that the droplets of water sparkle like snow. All of the versions of the Merlin story he knows involve the magician being imprisoned in a tree or a cave or a rock. Always as a punishment, the consequence of a foolish love. He looks back at Tsukiko. You understand, she says, before he could speak. Marco nods. I knew you would, she says. The light from the white flames brighten her smile through the rain. What are you doing, Tsukiko? A voice calls from behind her. When Tsukiko turns, Marco can see Celia standing at the edge of the courtyard. Her moonlight gown is soaked to a dull gray. Its crisscrossing ribbons stream out behind her in trails of black and white and charcoal, dangling with her hair in the wind. Go back to the party, dear, Tsukiko says, tucking the silver cigarette holder in her pocket. You will not want to be here for this. For what? Celia says, staring at Marco. When Tsukiko speaks, she addresses them both. I have been surrounded by love letters you two have built each other for years, encased in tents. It reminds me of what it was like to be with her. It is wonderful and it's terrible. I'm not yet prepared to give it up, but you are letting it fade. You told me love was fickle and fleeting. Celia says, confused. I lied, Tsukiko says, rolling her cigarette between her fingers. I thought it might be easier for you if you doubted him, and I gave you a year to find a way for the circus to continue without you. You have not. I am stepping in. Celia starts, but Tsukiko cuts her off. You continue to overlook a simple fact, she says. You carry this circus within yourself. He uses the fire as a tool. You are the greater loss, but too selfish to admit it. You believe you cannot live with the pain. Such pain is not lived with. It is only endured. I am sorry. Kiko, please, Celia says. I need more time. Tsukiko shakes her head. I told you before, she says. Time is not something I can control. Marco has not taken his eyes from Celia since she appeared in the courtyard, but now he turns away. Go ahead, he says to Tsukiko, shouting. Go ahead, he says to Tsukiko, shouting over the growing din of the rain. Do it! I would rather burn by her side than live without her. What might have been a simple cry of the word no is distorted into something greater by the wind as Celia screams. The agony in her voice cuts through Marco like every blade in Chandresha's collection combined, but he keeps his attention on the contortionist. It will end the game, yes? He asks. It will end the game even if I'm trapped in the fire and not dead. You will be unable to continue, Tsukiko says. That is all that matters. Then do it, Marco says. Tsukiko smiles at him. She places her palms together, curls of smoke from her cigarette rising over her fingertips. She gives him a low, respectful bow. Neither of them are watching as Celia runs towards them through the rain. Tsukiko flicks her still glowing cigarette towards the fire. It is still in the air when Marco cries out for Celia to stop. It has barely touched the flickering white flame of the bonfire when she leaps into his arms. Marco knows he does not have the time to push her away, so he pulls her close, burying his face in her hair, his bowler hat torn from his head by the wind. And then the pain starts. Sharp, ripping pain, as though he was being pulled apart. Trust me, Celia whispers in his ear, and he stops fighting it, forgetting everything but her. In the moment before the explosion, before the white light becomes too blinding to discern precisely what is happening, they dissolve into the air. One moment they are there, Celia's dress fluttering in the wind, and the rain, Marco's hands pressed against her back, and the next they are only a blur of light and shadow. Then both of them are gone, and the circus is ablaze, flames licking against the tents, twisting up into the rain. Alone in the courtyard, Tsukiko sighs, the flames passing her without touching, swirling around in a vortex, illuminating her with impossible brightness. Then, as quickly as they came, the flames died down to nothing. The bonfire's curling cage sinks empty. Not even a smoldering ember remains. The rain patters in a hollow echo against the metal, drops evaporating into steam where the iron is still hot. Tsukiko pulls another cigarette from her coat, flicks open her lighter with a lazy practiced gesture. The flame catches easily, despite the rain. She watches the cauldron fill with water while she waits. Transmutation. New York, November 1st, 1902. If Celia could open her mouth, she would scream. But there is too much control between the heat and the rain and Marco in her arms. She focuses only on him, pulling everything that he is with her as she breaks herself apart, holding to the memory of every touch of his skin against hers, every moment she has spent with him, carrying him within her. Suddenly there is nothing. No rain, no fire. A stretch of calm white nothingness. Somewhere in the nothingness, a clock begins to strike midnight. Stop, she thinks. The clock continues to chime, but she feels the stillness fall. The breaking is the easy part, Celia realizes. The pulling back together is the problem. It's like healing her sliced open fingertips as a child, taken to an extreme. There's so much to balance, trying to find the edges again. It would be so simple to let go. It would be so much easier to let go, so much less painful. She fights against the temptation, against the pain and the chaos, struggling for control with herself and her surroundings. She picks a location to focus on, the most familiar place she can think of. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, she pulls herself safely together, until she is standing in her own tent, in the center of a circle of empty chairs. She feels lighter, deluded, slightly dizzy, but she is not an echo of her from herself. She is whole again, breathing. She can feel her heart beating, fast but steady. Even her gown feels the same as it did, cascading around her and no longer wet and from the rain. She spins in a circle and it flares out around her. The dizziness begins to fade as she collects herself, still amazed at the accomplishment. Then she notices that everything in the tent around her is transparent. The chairs, the lights hanging above her head, even the stripes on the wall seem insubstantial. She is alone. For Marco, the moment of the explosion lasts much longer. The heat of the light stretches endlessly as she clings to Celia through the pain. And then she is gone. Nothing remains. No fire, no rain, no ground beneath his feet. His sights begin to shift continuously from shadow to light, darkness replaced by expansive white only to be consumed by darkness again, never settling. The circus shifts around Celia, as fluid as one of Marco's illusions. She pictures where she wishes to be within it, and she is there. She cannot even tell if she is moving herself or manipulating the circus around her. The ice garden is still and silent, nothing but crisp, cool whiteness in every direction. Only a fraction of the hall of mirrors reflects her own countenance, and some contain only a shimmering blur of pale gray gown or the motion of the billowing ribbons as they float behind her. She thinks she catches glimpses of Marco in the glass, the edge of his jacket or a bright flash of his collar, but she cannot be certain. Many of the mirrors sit hollow and empty within their ornate frames. The mist in the menagerie slowly dissipates as she searches the tent, finding nothing concealed within it but paper. The pool of tears does not even ripple, the surface calm and smooth, as she is unable to grasp a stone to drop within it. She cannot light a candle on the wishing tree, though the wishes that hang on its branches continue to burn. She moves through room after room in the labyrinth, rooms she created leading to the ones he made and back again. She can feel him, close enough that she expects him around each turn, behind each door. There are only soft drifting feathers and fluttering playing cards, silver statues with unseeing eyes, chessboard painted floors with vacant squares. There are traces of him everywhere, but nothing for her to focus on, nothing to hold on to. The hallway lined with mismatched doors and covered in fallen snow bears traces of what can only be footprints, and might only be shadows. Celia cannot tell where they led. Marco gasps as air fills his lungs, as though he had been underwater and unaware of it. And his first coherent thought is that he did not expect to be trapped in a fire to feel so cold. The cool air is sharp and stinging, and he can only see white in all directions. As his eyes adjust, he can discern the shadows of a tree, the hanging branches of a frosty white willow tree cascading around him. He takes a step forward, the ground disconcertingly soft beneath his feet. He stands in the middle of the ice garden. The fountain in the center has halted the normally bubbling water, quiet and still, and the whiteness makes the effect difficult to see, but the entire garden is transparent. He looks down at his hands. They are shaking slightly, but they appear to be solid. His suit remains dark and opaque. Marco lifts his hand to a nearby rose, and his fingers pass through its petals with only a soft resistance, as though they are made of water rather than ice. He is still looking at the rose when he hears a gasp behind him. Celia holds her hands to her lips, not quite believing her eyes. The sight of Marco standing in the ice garden is one she has imagined so many times before, while alone in the icy expanse of flowers. It does not seem real despite the darkness of his suit against a bower of pale roses. He then turns to look at her. As soon as she sees his eyes, all her doubts vanish. For a moment, he looks so young that she can see the boy he was, years before she met him, when they are already connected but still so far apart. There are so many things she wants to say, things she feared she would never have the opportunity to tell him again. Only one seems truly important. "I love you," she says. The words echo throughout the tent, softly rustling the frozen leaves. Marco only stares at her as she approaches, thinking her a dream. "I thought I'd lost you," she says when she reaches him, her voice a tremulous whisper. She seems to be as substantial as he is, not transparent like the garden. She appears rich and vibrant against a background of white, a bright flush in her cheeks, her dark eyes brimming with tears. He brings his hands to her face, petrified that his fingers will pass through her as easily as they had with the rose. The relief when she is solid and warm and alive to his touch is overwhelming. He pulls her into his arms, his tears falling onto her hair. "I love you," he says when he finds his voice. They stand entwined, each unwilling to release the other. "I couldn't let you do it," Celia says. "I couldn't let you go." "What did you do?" Marco asks. He is still not entirely certain he understood what has happened. "I used the circus as a touchstone," Celia says. "I didn't know if it would work, but I couldn't let you go. I had to try. I tried to take you with me, and then I couldn't find you, and I thought I'd lost you. I'm here, Marco says, stroking her hair. I'm here. It is not what he expected, being liberated from the world and reinstated in a confined location. He does not feel confined, only separated, as though he and Celia are overlapping the circus rather than contained within it. He looks around at the trees, the long frosted willow branches cascading down, the topiaries that line the nearby path like ghosts. Only then does he notice that the garden is melting. The bonfire went out, Marco says. He can feel it now, the emptiness. He can feel the circus all around him, as though it hangs onto him like a mist, that he could reach out and touch the iron fence despite the distance from it. Detecting the fence, how far away it is in every direction, where every tent sits, even the darkened courtyard and Tsukiko standing within it, is almost effortless. He can feel the entirety of the circus as easily as feeling his shirt against his skin. And the only thing burning brightly within it is Celia. But it is a flickering brightness, as fragile as a candle flame. You're holding the circus together, he says. Celia nods. It is only beginning to weigh on her, but it is much more difficult to manage without the bonfire. She cannot focus enough to keep the details intact. Elements are already slipping away, dripping like the flowers around them. She knows that if it breaks, she will not be able to pull it back together again. She is shaking, and though she steadies when Marco holds her tighter, she continues to tremble in his arms. Let go of it, Celia. I can't, she says. What if I let it go, it will collapse. What will happen to us if it collapses? Marco asks. I don't know, Celia says. I suspended it. It can't be self-sufficient without us. It needs a caretaker. Suspended. New York, November 1st, 1902. The last time Bailey entered this particular tent, Papa was with him, and it was filled with a dense white fog. Then, and Bailey has difficult believing it was only days ago, the tent had seemed endless. But now, without the cover of mist, Bailey can see the white walls of the tent and all the creatures within it, but none of them are moving. Birds and bats and butterflies hang throughout the space as if held by strings, completely still. No rustling of paper wings. No motion at all. Other creatures sit on the ground near Bailey's feet, including a black cat crouching pre-pounce near a silver-tipped white fox. There are large animals as well, a zebra with perfectly contrasting stripes, a reclining lion with a snowy mane, a white stag with tall antlers. Standing next to the stag is a man in a dark suit. He's almost transparent, like a ghost, or a reflection in glass. Part of his suits are no more than shadows. Bailey can see the stag clearly through the sleeve of his jacket. Bailey's debating whether or not it is a figment of his imagination when the man looks over at him, his eyes surprisingly bright, though Bailey cannot discern their color. I asked him not to send you this way, he says, thought it was the most direct. Who are you? Bailey asks. My name is Marco, says the man. You must be Bailey. Bailey nods. I wish you were not so young, Marco says. Something in his voice sounds profoundly sad, but Bailey is still distracted by his ghost-like appearance. Are you dead? He asks, walking closer. With a changing angle, Marco appears almost solid one moment and transparent the next. Not precisely, Marco says. Tsukiko said she was the only living person here who knew what happened. I suspect Miss Tsukiko is not always entirely truthful. You look like a ghost, Bailey says. He can think of no better way to describe it. You appear the same way to me, so which of us is real? Bailey has no idea how to answer that question, so he asks the first one of his own that comes to mind. Is that your bowler hat in the courtyard? To his surprise, Marco smiles. It is indeed, he says. I lost it before everything happened, so I got left behind. What happened? Bailey asks. Marco pauses before he answers. That is a rather long story. That's what Tsukiko said, Bailey says. He wonders if he can find Widget so he can do the storytelling properly. She was truthful on that point then, Marco says. Tsukiko intended to imprison me in the bonfire, the reasons for which are a longer story than we have time for, and there was a change of plan that resulted in the current situation. I was pulled apart and put back together again in a less concentrated state. Marco holds out his hand and Bailey reaches to touch it. His fingers move through without stopping, but there is a soft resistance, the impression that there is something occupying the space, even if it's not completely solid. It's not an illusion or a trick, Marco says. Bailey's brows furrow at the thought, but after a moment he nods. Poppet says nothing is impossible, and he finds he is beginning to agree. I am not interacting with the surroundings as directly as you are, Marco continues. You and everything here appears equally insubstantial from my perspective. Perhaps we will be able to discuss it at greater length another time. Come with me. He turns and begins walking towards the back of the tent. Bailey follows, taking a winding path around the animals. It is difficult to find places to step, though Marco glides ahead of him with much less difficulty. Bailey loses his balance, stepping around the prone figure of a polar bear. His shoulders knocked into a raven hanging in the air. The raven falls to the ground, its wings bent and broken. Before Bailey can say anything, Marco reaches down and picks up the raven, turning it over in his hands. He moves the broken wing and reaches inside, twisting something with a clicking noise. The raven turns his head and lets out a sharp, metallic caw. How can you touch them? Bailey asks. I'm still figuring out the logistics of interacting with physical things, Marco says, flattening the raven's wings and letting it limp down the length of his arm. It flaps its paper feathers but cannot fly. It likely has something to do with the fact that I made them. Elements of the circus I had a hand in creating seems to be more tangible. The raven hops off by a mountainous pile of paper scales, with a curling tail that looks as though it might have once been a dragon. They're amazing, Bailey says. They are paper and clockwork wrapped up in fairly simple charms. You could do the same with a bit of study. It has never crossed Bailey's mind that he could do such things himself, but having been told as much as so simply and directly, it seems strangely achievable. Where are we going? Bailey asks as they approach the far side of the tent. Someone would like to speak with you, Marco says. She's waiting at the wishing tree. It seems to be the most stable. I don't think I've seen the wishing tree, Bailey says, mindful of each step as they approach the other side of the tent. It is not a tent that is stumbled upon, Marco says. It is found when it is needed, instead. It is one of my favorite tents. You could take a candle from the box at the entrance and light it from one that already burns on the tree. Your wish is ignited by someone else's wish. They have reached the wall of the tent, and Marco indicates a break in the fabric, a barely visible row of ribbon ties that reminds Bailey of the entrance to Widget's tent with all the strange bottles. If you go out here, you will see the entrance to the acrobat tent across the way. I'll be right behind you, though you might not be able to see me until we are inside again. Be careful. Bailey unties the bows and slips out of the tent easily, finding himself in a winding path between tents. The sky above is gray but bright, despite the soft rain that is beginning to fall. The acrobat tent looms higher than the tent surrounding it, and the sign that reads Defiance of Gravity swings over the entrance only a few paces away. Bailey has been to this tent several times. He knows the open floor with the performers hanging above it well. When he steps through the door, it is not met with the wide open space he expects. He walks into a party, a celebration that has been frozen in place, suspended the same way the paper birds have been in the air. There are dozens of performers throughout the tent, bathed with light from glowing round lamps that hang high above. There are dozens of performers throughout the tent, bathed with light from glowing round lamps that hang high above amongst ropes and chairs and round cages. Some are standing in groups and pairs, others sit on pillows and boxes and chairs that add flashes of color to the predominantly black and white crowd. And each figure is perfectly still, so motionless that it seems like they are not even breathing, like statues. One near Bailey has a flute at his lips, the instrument silent in his fingers. Another is pouring a bottle of wine, the liquid hovering above the glass. We should have gone around, Marco says, appearing like a shadow by his side. I've been keeping an eye on them for hours, and they haven't gotten any less disturbing. What's wrong with them? Bailey asks. Nothing, as far as I can tell, Marco answers. The entirety of the The entirety of the circus has been suspended to give us more time. So... He lifts a hand and waves it over the party. Tsukiko's part of the circus, and she's not like this, Bailey says, confused. I believe she plays by her own rules, Marco says. This way, he adds, moving into the crowd of figures. Navigating the party proves more difficult than walking around the paper animals, and Bailey takes every step with extreme caution, afraid of what might happen if he accidentally hits someone the way he knocked down the raven. Almost there, Marco says, as they maneuver their way around a cluster of people grouped in a broken circle. Bailey stops, staring at the figure the group is facing. Widget wears his performance costume, but his patchwork jacket has been discarded, his vest hanging open over his black shirt. His hands are lifted in the air, gesturing in such a familiar way that Bailey can tell he's been stopped mid-story. Poppet stands next to him, her head turned in the direction of the courtyard, as though something pulled her attention away from her brother at the precise moment the party was halted. Her hair spills out behind her, waves of red floating in the air as she was suspended in water. Bailey walks around to face her, reaching out tentatively to touch her hair. It ripples beneath his fingers, undulating slowly before settling back to its frozen state. Can she see me? Bailey asks. Poppet's eyes are still yet bright. He expects her to blink at any moment, but she does not. I don't know, Marco says. Perhaps, but... Before he can conclude that thought, one of the chairs hanging above them falls, its ribbons snapping. When it comes close to hitting Widget, as it crashes to the ground, splintering into pieces. Bloody hell, Marco says as Bailey jumps back, almost colliding with Poppet and sending her hair into another brief wave of motion. Through there, Marco says, indicating the side of the tent that is some distance away. Then he vanishes. Bailey looks back at Poppet and Widget. Poppet's hair settles again, unmoving. Fragments of the falling chair rest on Widget's boot. Turning away, Bailey moves carefully around stationary figures to reach the edge of the tent. He casts nervous glances upward at the additional chairs and the round iron cages suspended by nothing but fraying ribbon. His fingers shake as he undoes the ties in the wall. As soon as he passes through, he feels as though he has walked into a dream. Inside the adjoining tent there is a towering tree, as large as his old oak tree, growing right out of the ground. The branches are bare and black, but they are covered with dripping white candles, translucent layers of wax frosting over the bark. Only a fraction of the candles are burning, but the sight is no less resplendent, as they illuminate the twisting black branches, casting dancing shadows over the striped walls. Beneath it, Marco stands with his arms around a woman Bailey recognizes instantly as the illusionist. She appears as transparent as Marco does. Her gown looks like mist in the candlelight. Hello, Bailey, she says, as he approaches. Her voice echoes around him softly, as close as if she were standing next to him, whispering in his ear. I like your scarf, she adds when he does not immediately reply. The words in his ears are warm and strangely comforting. I'm Celia. I don't believe we were ever properly introduced. Nice to meet you, Bailey says. Celia smiles, and Bailey is struck by how different she seems from the way she did when he watched her perform, even beyond the fact that he can look through her at the dark tree branches. How did you know I was coming here? He asks. Poppet mentioned you as a part of the series of events that occurred earlier, so I hoped you would arrive eventually. At the mention of Poppet's name, Bailey glances over his shoulder at the wall of the tent. The suspended party seems farther away than just beyond the canvas stripes. We need your help with something, Celia continues as he turns back. We need you to take over the circus. What? Bailey asks. He is not sure what he was expecting, but this was not it. Right now, the circus is in need of a new caretaker, Marco says. It is drifting, like a ship without an anchor. It needs someone to anchor it. And that someone is me, Bailey asks. We would like it to be yes, Celia says. If you are willing to make the commitment, we should be able to assist you, and Poppet and Widget would be able to help as well. But the true responsibility would be yours. But I'm not special, Bailey says. Not in the way they are. I'm not anyone important. I know, Celia says. You are not destined or chosen. I wish I could tell you that if you were to make I wish I could tell you that you were if that would make it easier. But it's not true. You are in the right place at the right time, and you care enough to do what needs to be done. Sometimes that's enough. As he watches her in the flickering light, it strikes Bailey suddenly that she is a fair deal older than she appears, and that the same is likely true of Marco. It is like realizing someone in a photograph is no longer the same age as they were when it was taken, and they seem farther away because of it. The circus itself feels far away, even though he stands within it, as though it is falling away from him. All right, Bailey says, but Celia holds up a transparent hand to stop him before he agrees. Wait, she says. This is important. I want you to have something neither of us truly had. I want you to have a choice. You can agree to this, or you can walk away. You are not obligated to help, and I do not want you to feel that you are. What happens if I walk away? Bailey asks. Celia looks at Marco before she answers. They only look at each other without speaking, but the gesture is so intimate that Bailey glances away, looking up at the twisting branches of the tree. It won't last, Celia says after a moment. She does not elaborate, turning back to Bailey as she continues. I know this is a great deal to request from you, but I do not have anyone else to ask. Suddenly, the candles on the tree begin to spark. Some of them darken, curls of smoke replacing the bright flames only momentarily before disappearing themselves. Celia wavers, and for a moment Bailey thinks she might faint, but Marco steadies her. Celia, love, Marco says, running his hand over her hair. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You can hold out for a while longer. I know you can. I'm sorry, Celia says. Bailey cannot tell which one of them she is speaking to. You have nothing to be sorry about, Marco says. Celia holds tightly to his hand. What would happen to the two of you if the circus stopped? Bailey asked. Truthfully, I'm not entirely certain, Celia says. Nothing good, Marco mutters. What would you need me to do? Bailey asks. I need you to finish something I started, Celia says. I acted rather impulsively and played my cards out of order. And now there's a matter of the bonfire as well. The bonfire? Bailey asks. Think of the circus as a machine, Marco says. The bonfire is one of the things that powers it. There are two things that need to happen, Celia says. First, the bonfire needs to be lit. That will power half the circus. What about the other half? Bailey asks. That's more complicated, Celia says. I carry that with me, and I'll have to give that to you. Oh. We would then carry it with you, Celia says. All of the time. You'd be tied very tightly to the circus itself. You could leave, but not for extended periods of time. I do not know if you would be able to give it to someone else. It would be yours, always. It is only then that Bailey realizes the scope of the commitment he is being asked for. It is not the handful of years committed to Harvard. It is, he thinks, an even greater commitment than inheriting responsibility for the family farm. He looks from Marco to Celia, and knows from the look in her eyes that she will let him go if he asks to leave, no matter what that might mean for them or for the circus. He thinks of a litany of questions, but none of them truly matter. He already knows his answer already. He knows his answer already. His choice was made when he was 10 years old, under a different tree, bound up in acorns and dares, in a single white glove. He will always choose the circus. I'll do it, he says. I'll stay. I'll do whatever it is you need me to do. Thank you, Bailey, Celia says softly. The words resonate in his ears. The words resonating in his ears soothe the last of his nerves. Indeed, Marco says. I think we should make this official. Do you think that's absolutely necessary? Celia asks. At this point, I'm not about to settle for a verbal contract, Marco says. Celia frowns for a moment, but then nods her consent, and Marco carefully lets go of her hand. She stays steady, and her appearance does not waver. Do you want me to sign something? Bailey asks. Not exactly, Marco says. He takes a silver ring from his right hand. It is engraved with something Bailey cannot discern in the light. Marco reaches up to a branch above his head and passes the ring through one of the burning candles until it glows, white and hot. Bailey wonders whose wish that particular flame might be. I made a wish on this tree years ago, Marco says, as though he knows what Bailey is thinking. What did you wish for? Bailey asked, hoping it's not too forward a question, but Marco does not answer. Instead, he folds the glowing ring into his palm, and then he offers his hand to Bailey. Bailey hesitantly reaches out, expecting his fingers to pass through Marco's hand as easily as they did before. But instead, they stop, and Marco's hand in his is almost solid. Marco leans forward and whispers into Bailey's ears. I wished for her, he said. Then Bailey's hand began to hurt. The pain is bright and hot as the ring burns into his skin. What are you doing? He manages to ask when he can gasp enough for air. The pain is sharp and searing, coursing through his entire body, and he is barely able to keep his knees from buckling beneath him. Binding, Marco says. It is one of my specialties. He releases Bailey's hand. The pain vanishes instantly, but Bailey's legs continue to tremble. Are you all right? Celia asks. Bailey nods, looking down at his palm. The ring is gone, but there's a bright red circle burnt into his skin. Bailey is certain, without having to ask, that it will be a scar he carries with him always. He closes his hand and looks back at Marco and Celia. Tell me what I need to do now, he says. The second lighting of the bonfire. New York, November 1st, 1902. Bailey finds the tiny book-filled room without much difficulty. The large black raven sitting in the corner blinks at him curiously as he sorts through the contents of the desk. He flips anxiously through the large leather book until he finds the pages with Poppet and Widget's signatures. He tears the page from the binding carefully, removing it completely. He finds a pen in a drawer and writes his own name across the page as he has been instructed. While the ink dries, he gathers up the rest of the things that he will need, running through the list over and over in his head so he does not forget anything. The yarn is easily found. A ball of it sits precariously on a pile of books. 2 cards, one familiar playing card and the other a tarot card emblazoned with an angel, are amongst the papers on the desk. He tucks these into the front cover of the book. The doves in the cage above him stir with a soft fluttering of feathers. The pocket watch on its long silver chain proves most difficult to locate. He finds it on the ground beside the desk, and when he attempts to dust it off a bit, he can see the initials HB engraved on the back. The watch no longer ticks. Bailey places the loose page on top of the book and tucks it under his arm. The watch and the yarn he puts in his pockets. The candle he pulls from the wishing tree. The raven cocks his head at him as he leaves. The doves remain asleep. Bailey crosses the adjoining tent, walking around the double circle of chairs as passing directly through it does not seem appropriate. Outside, the light rain is still falling. He hurries back to the courtyard, where he finds Tsukiko waiting for him. Celia says I need to borrow your lighter, he says. Tsukiko tilts her head curiously, looking oddly like a bird with a cat-like grin. I suppose that is acceptable, she says after a moment. She pulls the silver lighter from her coat pocket and tosses it to him. It is heavier than he had expected. A complicated mechanism of gears partially encased in worn and tarnished silver, with symbols he cannot distinguish etched into the surface. Be careful with that, Thikika says. Is it magic? Bailey asks, turning it over in his hands. No, but it is old, and it was constructed by someone very dear to me. I take it you are attempting to light that again. She gestures at the towering bowl of twisted metal that once held the bonfire. Bailey nods. Do you want any help? Are you offering? Tsukiko shrugs. I am not terribly invested in the outcome, she says, but something about the way she looks around at the tents in the mud makes Bailey doubt her words. I don't believe you, he says, but I am, and I think I should do this on my own. Tsukio smiles at him, the first smile he has seen from her that seems genuine. I shall leave you to it then, she says. She runs a hand along the iron cauldron, and most of the rainwater within it turns to steam, rising in a soft cloud that dissipates into the fog. With no further advice or instruction, she walks off down a black and white striped path, a thin curl of smoke trailing behind her, leaving Bailey alone in the courtyard. He remembers Widget telling him that the story of the lighting of the bonfire, the first lighting, though he only now realizes that it was also the night that Widget was born. He had told the story in such detail that Bailey assumed he had witnessed it firsthand. The archers, the colors, the spectacle. And now here Bailey stands, trying to accomplish the same feat with only a book and some yarn and a borrowed cigarette lighter. Alone in the rain. He mumbles to himself what he can remember of Celia's instructions, the ones that are more complicated than finding books and tying strings. Things about focus and intent as he does not entirely understand. He wraps the book with a length of fine wool yarn dyed a deep crimson, bits of it stained darker with something dried and brown. He knots it 3 times, binding the book closed with the loose page against the cover, the cards securely pressed inside. The pocket watch he hangs around it, looping the chain as best as he can. He throws it in the empty cauldron where it lands a dull wet thud, the watch clattering against the metal. Marco's bowler hat sits in the mud by his feet. He throws it in as well. He glances back in the direction of the acrobat tent, and he can see the top of it from the courtyard, rising taller than the surrounding tents. And then, impulsively, he takes out the remaining contents of his pocket and adds them to the collection in his cauldron. His silver ticket, the dried rose he had worn on his lapel at the dinner with the Reveres, Poppet's white glove. He hesitates, turning the tiny glass bottle with Widget's vision of his tree, trapped inside it over in his hand, but then he adds it as well, flinching as it shatters against the iron. He takes the single white candle in the other hand and Tsukiko's lighter in one hand and Tsukiko's lighter in the other. He fumbles with the lighter before it consents to spark. He then ignites the candle with a bright orange flame. He throws the burning candle into the cauldron. Nothing happens. I choose this, Bailey thinks. I want this. I need this. Please. Please let this work. He wishes it, harder than he has ever wished for anything over birthday candles or on shooting stars. Wishing for himself, for the Reveres and for the Reveres in their red scarves, for a clockmaker he'd never met, for Celia and Marco and Poppet and Widget, and even for Tsukiko, though she claims she does not care. Bailey closes his eyes. For a moment, everything is still. Even the light rain suddenly stops. He feels a pair of hands resting on his shoulders, a heaviness in his chest. Something within the twisted iron cauldron begins to spark. When the flames catch, they are bright and crimson. When they turn to white, they are blinding, and the shower of sparks fall like stars. The force of the heat pushes Bailey backwards, moving through him like a wave, the air burning hot in his lungs. He falls on the ground that is no longer charred and muddy, but firm and dry and patterned in a spiral of black and white. All around him, lights are popping to life among the tents, flickering like fireflies. Marco stands beneath the wishing tree, watching as the candles come alight along the branches. A moment later, Celia reappears at his side. Did it work? He asks. Please tell me that it worked. In response, she kisses him the way he once kissed her in the middle of a crowded ballroom, as though they are the only 2 people in the world. Part 5. Divination. I find I think of myself not as a writer so much as someone who provides a gateway, a tangible route for readers to reach the circus. To visit the circus again, if only in their minds, and when they are unable to attend it physically. I relay it through printed words on crumpled newsprint, words that they can read again and again, returning to the circus whenever they wish, regardless of the time of day or physical location, transporting them at will. When put that way, it sounds rather like magic, doesn't it? Frederick Thyssen, 1898. Our revels are now ended. These are actors. As I foretold you, we're all spirits, and are melting into air, into thin air, and, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself. Yeah, with all its inherit, I shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Prospero, The Tempest, Act 4, Scene 1. Fates foretold. It is late, so there is no line for the fortune-teller. While outside the cool night air is scented with caramel and smoke, this tent is warm and smells of incense and roses and beeswax. You do not wait long in the antechamber before passing through the beaded curtain. It makes a sound like rain as the beads collide. The room beyond is lined with candles. You sit down at the table in the center of the room. Your chair is surprisingly comfortable. The fortune-teller's face is hidden behind a fine black veil, but the light catches her eyes as she smiles. She has no crystal ball, no deck of cards. Only a handful of sparkling silver stars that she scatters across the velvet-covered table, reading them like runes. She refers to things she could not know with uncanny specificity. She tells you facts you already knew, information you might have guessed, possibilities you cannot fathom. The stars on the table almost seem to move in the undulating candlelight, shifting and changing before your eyes. Before you leave, the fortune-teller reminds you that the future is never set in stone. Blueprints. London, December, 1902. Puppet Murray stands on the front steps of La Mansion Lefebvre, a leather briefcase in hand and a large satchel sitting by her feet. She rings the doorbell a dozen times, alternating with a series of loud knocks, though she can hear the bell echoing within the house. When the door finally swings open, Chandresh himself stands behind it, his violet shirt untucked and a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. "You were smaller the last time I saw you," he says, looking at Puppet over from her boots to her upswept red hair. "And there were two of you." My brother is in France, Puppet says, picking up the satchel and following Chandresh inside. The golden elephant-headed statue in the hall is in need of polishing. The house is in a state of disarray, or as much disarray as a house crammed from floor to ceiling with antiques and books and objets d'art can be in its inherent cozy, cluttered way. It does not shine as brightly as it had when she ran through the halls with Widget what seemed like more than a few years ago, chasing marmalade kittens through a rainbow of guests. "What happened to your staff?" she asked as they ascended the stairs. "I dismissed a lot of them," Chandresh says. "They were useless and could not keep a single thing in order. I retained only the cooks. I haven't had a dinner in quite some time, but at least they know what they're doing." Puppet follows him down the column-lined hall to his study. She has never been in this particular room before, but she doubts it was always so covered with blueprints and sketches and empty brandy bottles. Chandresh wanders across the room, adding the crumpled piece of paper in his hand to a sack on a chair and staring idly at a set of blueprints hanging over the windows. Puppet clears the space on the desk to put the briefcase down, moving books and antlers and carved jaded turtles. She leaves the satchel on the floor nearby. "Why are you here?" Chandresh says, turning and looking at Puppet as though he has only just noticed her presence. Puppet snaps open the briefcase on the desk, pulling out a dense pile of paper. "I need you to do a favor for me, Chandresh," she says. "What might that be?" "I would like you to sign over ownership of the circus." Puppet finds a fountain pen amongst the clutter on the desk and tests it on a scrap of paper to see if it's properly inked. The circus was never mine to begin with, Shinjesh mutters. Of course it was, Poppet says, drawing a swirling letter P. It was your idea, but I know you do not have the time for it, and I thought it might be best if you relinquish your position as proprietor. Shinjesh considers this for a moment. Then he nods and walks over to the desk to read through the contract. You have Ethan and Lainey listed here, but not Tante Padva, he says, as he peruses it. I have spoken with all of them already, Poppet says. Madame Padva wishes not to be involved any longer, but she is confident that Miss Burgess can handle her responsibilities. Who is this Mr. Clark? Shinjesh asks. He is a very dear friend of mine, Poppet says, a soft blush warming her cheeks, and he will take excellent care of the circus. When Shinjesh reaches the end of the document, she hands him the pen. He signs his name with a wobbling flourish, letting the pen drop onto the desk. I appreciate this more than I can say. Poppet blows on the ink to dry before she returns it. Poppet blows on the ink to dry it before she can return the contract to the briefcase. Shinjesh brushes her words away with a lazy wave of his hand, walking back to the window and staring at the expanse of blue papers hanging over it. What are these blueprints for? Poppet asks after she closed the briefcase. I have all these plans from Ethan, and I don't know what to do with them, Shinjesh says, waving her arm around the multitudes of paper. Poppet removes her coat, leaving it draped over the back of the desk chair, and takes a closer look at the blueprints and sketches hanging from the shelves, intact to the mirrors and paintings and windows. Some are complete rooms, others are bits of exterior architecture, or elaborate archways and hallways. She stops when she reaches a dartboard with a silver knife embedded in patterned cork, its blade marred with dark stains. The knife vanishes as Poppet continues walking, though Shinjesh does not notice. Hello, Bread, hello, how are you? How are you, my friend? Thank you for coming to this. Thank you for coming. We're doing a story time. I hope you're enjoying the story, friend. I hope you are. They are meant to be renovations to the house, he says as she tours the room, but they do not fit properly together. It's a museum, Poppet says, overlaying the pieces in her mind, seeing where they match up with the building she has already seen in the stars. They are completely out of order, but it is unmistakable. She pulls down a set of blueprints and switches it with another, arranging them story by story. It's not this building, she explains as Shinjesh watches her curiously. It's a new one. She takes a series of doors, alternate versions of the same possible entrances, and lays them side by side along the floor, letting each lead to a different room. Shinjesh watches as she arranges the plans, a grin spreading across his face as he begins to see what she is doing. He makes adjustments to the flood of pressure. Your story time is the best whenever I'm trying to draw. Aw, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you enjoy it. Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. You make me blush. I'm glad you enjoy it. Thank you for being here. He makes adjustments to the flood of Prussian blue paper himself, responding to her arrangements, surrounding replicas of ancient Egyptian temples with columns of curving bookshelves. They sit together on the floor, combining rooms and halls and stairs. Shinjesh starts to call for Marco, but catches himself. I keep forgetting that he's gone, he says to Poppet. Left one day and did not come back. Didn't even leave a note. You would think someone who was constantly writing notes would leave one. I believe his departure was unplanned, Poppet says, and I know he regrets not being able to properly settle his responsibilities here. Do you know why he left? Shinjesh asks, looking up at her. He left to be with Celia Bowen, Poppet says, unable to keep from smiling. Ha! Shinjesh exclaims. Didn't think he had it in him. Good for him. Good for them. Let's have a toast. A toast? You're right, there's no champagne, Shinjesh says, pulling aside a pile of empty brandy bottles as he lays out another string of sketches along the floor. We'll dedicate a room to them. Which one do you think they would like? Poppet looks over the blueprints and sketches. There are several that she thinks either or both of them might like. She stops at a drawing of a round, windowless room illuminated only by light that filters through the koi pond and clothed in the glass above it, serene and enchanting. This one, she says. Chandresh takes a pencil and writes dedicated to M. Alistair and C. Bowen along the edge of the paper. I could help you find a new assistant, Poppet offers. I could stay in London for a while. I would appreciate that, my dear. The large satchel that Poppet had placed on the floor nearby suddenly falls to its side with a soft thump. What's in the bag? Chandresh asks, eyeing it with a certain amount of trepidation. I brought you a present, Poppet says brightly. She rights the bag, opening it carefully, and pulls out a small black kitten with splotches of white along its leg and tail. It looks as though it has been dipped in cream. Her name is Ara, Poppet tells him. She'll come when she's called, and she knows a few tricks, but mostly she likes attention and sitting in windows. I thought you might like the company. She puts the kitten gently on the floor and holds her hand above it. The kitten stretches up on its hind legs with a soft mew and licks Poppet's fingers before turning his attention to Chandresh. Hello, Ara, he says. I'm not going to give you your memory back, Poppet says, watching Chandresh as the little kitten attempts to crawl on his lap. I don't know if I could, even if I tried. The witch could probably manage it. At this point, I don't think you need that weight on you. I think looking forward will be better than looking back. Whatever are you talking about? Chandresh asks, picking up the kitten and scratching it behind the ears as it purrs. Nothing, Poppet says. Thank you, Chandresh. She leans over and kisses him on the cheek. As soon as her lips touch his skin, Chandresh feels better than he has in years, as though a last of a fog has lifted from him. His mind is clear, the plans of the museum become cohesive, ideas for future projects aligning themselves in ways that seem completely manageable. Chandresh and Poppet spend hours arranging and adding to the blueprints, creating a new space to be filled with antiques and arts and visions of the future. The black and white kitten paws playfully at the curling paper as they work. Stories. Paris, January 1903. Stories have changed, my dear boy, the man in the gray suit says, his voice almost imperceptibly sad. There are no more battles between good and evil, no monsters to slay, no maidens in need of rescue. Most maidens are perfectly capable of rescuing themselves, in my experience. At least the ones worth something in any case. There are no longer simple tales with quests and beasts and happy endings. The quests lack clarity of goal or path. The beasts take different forms and are difficult to recognize for what they are. And there are never really endings, happy or otherwise. Things just keep going. Things just keep going on. They overlap and blur. Your story is part of your sister's story, is part of many other stories, and there is no telling where any of them may lead. Good and evil are a great deal more complex than a princess and a dragon, or a wolf and a scarlet-clad little girl. And is not the dragon the hero of his own story? Is not the wolf simply acting as a wolf should act? So perhaps it is a singular wolf who goes in such length as to dress as a grandmother to toy with his prey. Widget sips his glass of wine, considering the words before he replies. But wouldn't that mean there were never any simple tales at all? He asks. The man in the gray suit shrugs, then lifts the bottle of wine from the table to refill his own glass. That is a complicated matter. The heart of the tale and the ideas behind it are simple. Time has altered and condensed their nuances, made them more than story, greater than the sum of their parts. But that requires time. The truest tale requires time and familiarity to become what they are. Their waiter stops at the table and converses briefly with Widget, paying no notice to the man in the gray suit. How many languages do you speak? The man asks once the waiter has departed. I've never stopped to count, Widget says. I can speak anything once I have heard it enough to grasp the basis. Impressive. I picked up bits and pieces naturally, and Celia taught me how to find the patterns, to put the sounds together in complete sets. I hope she was a better teacher than her father. From what I know of her father, they are quite different. She never forced Poppet or me into playing complicated games, for one thing. Do you know what the challenge you are alluding to was? The man in the gray suit asks. Do you? Widget asks. It seems to me that it was not entirely clear-cut. Few things in this world are clear-cut. A very long time ago, I suppose you could say once upon a time if you wished it to sound a grander tale than it is, one of my first students and I had a disagreement about the ways of the world, about permanence and endurance in time. He thought my systems outdated. He developed methods of his own that he thought superior. I'm of the opinion that no methodology is worthwhile unless it can be taught, so he began teaching. The pitting of our respective students against each other began as simple tests, though over time they became more complex. There were always, at the heart, challenges of chaos and control to see which technique was strongest. It is one thing to put two competitors alone in a ring and wait for one to hit the ground. It is another to see how they fare when there are other factors in the ring along with them, when there are repercussions with every action taken. This final challenge was particularly interesting. I will admit that Miss Bowen found a very clever way out, though I do regret losing a student of my own in the process. He takes a sip of his wine. He is possibly the best student I ever taught. You believe he's dead? Widget asks. The man puts down his glass. You believe he is not, he counters after a significant pause. I know he's not, just as I know that Celia's father, who is also not dead precisely, is standing by that window. Widget lifts his glass, tilting it towards the darkened window by the door. The image in the glass, which could be a gray-haired man in a finely tailored coat, or could be an amalgamation of reflections from customers and waiters in bent and broken light from the streets, ripples slightly before becoming completely indistinguishable. Neither of them are dead, Widget continues, but they're not that either. He nods at the window. They are in the circus. They are the circus. You can hear his footsteps in the labyrinth. You can smell her perfume in the cloud maze. It's marvelous. You think being imprisoned is marvelous? It is a matter of perspective, Widget says. They have each other. They are confined within a space that is remarkable, one that can, and will, grow and change around them. In a way, they have the world, but only by his imagination. Marco has been teaching his illusion techniques to me, but I have not yet mastered it. So yes, I think it's marvelous. He thought of you as his father, you know. Did he tell you that? The man in the gray suit asks. Not in words, which it says. He let me read him. I see people's pasts, sometimes in great deal of the person in question trusts me. He trusts me because Celia does. I do not think he blames you in it any longer. Because of you, he has her. I chose him to contrast her and to complement. Well, perhaps I chose too well. The man in the gray suit leans into the table, as though he might whisper his words conspiratorially, but the tenor of his voice does not change. That was the mistake, you realize. They were too well matched, too taken with each other to be competitive, and now they can never be separated. Pity. I take it you are not a romantic, Widget says, picking up the bottle to refill his glass. I was in my youth, which was very, very long time ago. I can tell, Widget says as he replaces the bottle on the table. The man in the gray suit's past stretches back a long, long time. Longer than anyone Widget has ever met. He can only read parts of it, so much of it is worn and faded. The parts connected to the circus are clearest, the easiest for him to grasp. Do I look that old? You have no shadow. The man in the gray suit cracks a smile. The only noticeable change in his expression has displayed the entire evening. You are quite perceptive, he says. Not one person in 100, perhaps even 1,000, notices as much. Yes, my age is quite advanced. I have seen a great many things in my time. Some I would prefer to forget. It takes a toll on a person, after all. Everything does in its way, just as everything fades with time. I am no exception to that rule. Are you going to end up like him? Widget nods at the window. I certainly hope not. I am content to accept inevitabilities, even if I have ways of putting them off. He was seeking immortality, which is a terrible thing to seek. It is not seeking anything, but rather avoiding the unavoidable. He will grow to despise that state if he does not already. I I hope my student and your teacher are more fortunate. You mean you hope they can die? Widget asks. I mean only that I hope they find darkness or paradise without fear of it, if they can. He pauses before adding, I hope that for you and your compatriots as well. Thank you, Widget says, though he's not entirely certain he understands the sentiment. I sent your cradle when you were born, to welcome you and your sister to this world. The least I can do is wish you a pleasant exit from it, as I highly doubt I will be there to see you off in person. I hope not to be, in fact. Is magic not enough to live for? Widget asks. Magic, the man in the gray suit repeats, turning the words into a laugh. This is not magic. This is the way of the world is. Only very few people take the time to stop and note it. Look around you, he says, waving a hand at the surrounding tables. Not one of them has even an inkling of the things that are possible in this world. And what's worse is that none of them would listen if you attempt to enlighten them. They want to believe that magic is nothing but clever deception, because to think it real would keep them up at night, afraid of their own existence. But some people can be enlightened, Widget says. Indeed, such things can be taught. It is easier with minds that are younger than these. There are tricks, of course. None of those rabbits in the hats nonsense, but ways of making the universe more accessible. Very, very few people take the time to learn them nowadays, unfortunately, and even fewer have natural access. You and your sister do, as an unforeseen effect of the opening of your circus. What is it you do with that talent? What purpose does it serve? Widget considers this before he answers. Beyond the confines of the circus, there seems to be little place for such things, so perhaps that is part of the man's point. I tell stories, he says. It's the most truthful answer he has. You tell stories? The man asks, the piquing of his interest almost palpable. Stories, tales, bardic chronicles, Widget says. Whatever you care to call them. The things we were discussing earlier that are more complicated than they used to be. I take pieces of the past that I see and I combine them into narratives. It's not that important, and this isn't why I'm here. It is important, the man in the gray suit interrupts. Someone needs to tell those tales. When the battles are fought and won and lost, when the pirates find their treasures and the dragons eat their foes for breakfast with a nice cup of lapsang souchong, someone needs to tell their bits of overlapping narrative. There's magic in that. It's in the listener, and for each and every ear it will be different, and it will affect them in ways they can never predict, from the mundane to the profound. You may tell a tale that takes up residence in someone's soul, becomes their blood and self and purpose. That tale will move them and drive them, and who knows what they might do because of it, because of your words. That is your role, your gift. Your sister may be able to see the future, but you yourself can shape it, boy. Do not forget that. He takes another sip of his wine. There are many kinds of magic, after all. Widget pauses, considering the change in the way the man in the gray suit watches him. He wonders if all the grand words earlier about stories no longer being what they once were was all for show, something that the man does not truly believe. While before his interest level bordered on indifferent, he now looks at Widget as a child might look at a new toy, or the way a wolf would regard a particularly interesting piece of prey, scarlet-clad or otherwise. You're trying to distract me, Widget says. The man in the gray suit only sips his wine, regarding Widget over the rim of his glass. Is the game finished then? Widget asks. Yes and no. He puts down his glass before continuing. Technically, it has fallen into an unforeseen loophole. It has not been properly completed. And what of the circus? I suppose that is why you wish to speak with me. Widget nods. Bailey has inherited his position from your players. My sister has settled the business end of things with Chandresh. On paper and in principle, we own and operate the circus already. I volunteered to handle the remainder of the transition. I am not fond of loose ends, but I am afraid it's not that simple. I do not mean to suggest that it was, Widget says. In the pause that follows, a gale of laughter rises from a few tables over, rippling through the air before settling back down, disappearing into the low, steady hum of conversations and clinking glasses. You have no idea what you're getting into, my boy, the man in the gray suit says quietly. How fragile and enterprise it all is. How uncertain the consequences are. What would your Bailey be had he not been so adopted into your circus? Nothing but a dreamer, longing for something he does not even understand. I don't think there's anything wrong with being a dreamer. There is not, but dreams have a way of turning into nightmares. I suspect Monsieur Lefebvre knows something of that. You'd be better off letting the whole endeavor fade away into myth and oblivion. All empires fall eventually. It is the way of things. Perhaps it is time to let this one go. I'm afraid I'm unwilling to do that, which it says. You are very young. I would wager that combined, even beyond the fact that Bailey and my sister and myself are comparatively, as you said, very young. If I calculated the ages of everyone I have behind this proposition, then the total might trump your own age. Perhaps. And I do not know exactly what kind of rules your game had, but I suspected that you owe us this much if we were all put at risk for your wager. The man in the gray suit sighs. He casts a quick glance towards the window, but the shadow of Hector Bowen is nowhere to be seen. If Prospero the Enchanter has an opinion on the matter, he chooses not to voice it. I suppose that is a valid argument, the man in the gray suit says after some consideration. But I owe you nothing, young man. Then why are you here? Widget asks. The man smiles, but he says nothing. I am negotiating for what is, essentially, a used playing field, Widget continues. It is of no further use to you. It holds a great deal of importance to me. I will not be dissuaded. Name your price. The man in the gray suit's smile brightens considerably. I want a story, he says. A story? I want this story. Your story. The tale of what brought us to this place, in these chairs, with this wine. I don't want a story you create from here. He taps his temple with his finger. I want the one that is here. He lets his hand hover over his heart for a moment before sitting back on his chair. Richard considers this offer for a moment. And if I tell you this story, will you give me the circus? I will pass on to you what little of it remains for me to give. When we leave this table, I will have no claim over your circus, no connection to it whatsoever. When that bottle of wine is empty, a challenge that started before you were even born will be over, officially declared a stalemate. That should suffice. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Murray? We have an agreement, which it says. The man in a gray suit pours the last of the wine. The candlelight catches and bends in the empty bottle as he places it on the table. Widget swirls his wine around his glass. Wine is bottled poetry, he thinks. It is a sentiment he first heard from Herr Thyssen, but he knows it is properly attributed to another writer, though at the moment he cannot recall who exactly. There are so many places to begin, so many elements to consider. He wonders if the poem of the circus could possibly be bottled. Widget takes a sip of his wine and puts his glass down on the table. He sits back in his chair and steadily returns the stare aimed at him, taking his time as though he has all of it in the world, in the universe, from the days when tales meant more than they do now, but perhaps less than they will someday. He draws a breath that releases the tangled knot of words in his heart, and they fall from his lips effortlessly. The circus arrives without warning. 1 Reeves. There are very few people wandering through Le Cirque de Reeves with you in these pre-dawn hours. Some are wearing red scarves that are particularly vibrant against the black and white. You do not have much time before the sun inevitably rises. You are faced with the conundrum of how to fill the remaining minutes of the night. Should you visit one last tent, one that you have already entered and particularly enjoyed, or an unexplored tent that remains a mystery? Or should you seek out one last pre-breakfast caramel apple? The night that seems endless hours before is now slipping from your fingers, ticking by as it falls into the past and pushes you towards the future. Spend your last moments at the circus as you wish, for it is your time and yours alone. But before long, it is time for Le Cirque de Reeves to close, at least for the time being. The star-filled tunnel has been removed. Only a single curtain separates the courtyard from the entrance now. When it closes behind you, the distance feels greater than a few steps divided by a striped curtain. You hesitate before you exit, pausing to watch the intricate dancing clock as it ticks down the seconds, pieces moving seamlessly. You are able to watch it more closely than you had when you entered, as there is no longer a crowd obscuring it. Beneath the clock there is an unobtrusive silver plaque. You have to bend down to make out the inscription, engraved on the polished metal. In memoriam. It reads across the top, with the names and dates below in smaller font. Frederick Stefan Thiessen, September 9th, 1846, November 1st, 1901. And Chandresh Christophe Lefebvre, August 3rd, 1847, February 15th, 1932. Someone is watching you as you read the memorial plaque. You sense there's eyes on you before you realize where the unexpected gaze is coming from. The ticket booth is still occupied. The woman stationed aside is watching and smiling at you. You're not entirely sure what to do. She waves at you, a small but friendly wave as if to assure you that everything is fine. The visitors often stop before they depart Les Cirque de Rives to stare at the clockwork wonder that sits by the gates. Some even read the inscribed memorial for two men who died so many years ago that you stand in the position that many have stood before, under already fading stars and sparkling lights. The woman beckons you over at the ticket booth. While you walk towards her, she sorts through piles of paper and tickets. There is a spray of silver and black feathers in her hair that flutter around her head when she moves. When she finds what she is seeking, she hands it to you, and you take the business card from her black-gloved hand. One side is black and the other is white. Le Cirque de Rives is printed on shimmering silver letters on the black side. On reverse in black ink on white, it reads, Mr. Bailey Alden Clark, proprietor. Bailey at nightcircus.com. You turn it over in your hand, wondering what you might write to Mr. Clark. Perhaps you will thank him for his very singular circus. Perhaps that will suffice. You thank the woman for the card, and she only smiles in response. You walk towards the gates, reading the card in your hand. Before you pass through the gates to the field beyond, you turn back to the ticket booth, but it is empty, a black grate pulled down over it. You tuck the card carefully into your pocket. The steps through the gate that take you from the painted ground to the bare grass feels heavy. You think as you walk away from the Cirque de Rives into the creeping dawn that you felt more awake within the confines of the circus. You are no longer quite certain which side of the fence is the dream. And that's the end! Oh my goodness, that is the end of the story! I feel like I want to cry. Right now it's only the acknowledgements that's left. Well, that was beautiful. That was an amazing story, y'all. I'm actually tearing up. I'm actually tearing up because I'm sad that it's over. That was amazing. That was an amazing story. That was the Night Circus, y'all. It's always so bittersweet when a good story ends. This one was beautiful. This was an amazing tale of so many people, of a deep connection of love and of complicated matters. It was such a beautiful story, y'all. I'm very, very sad that it's over. But, you know, as it always is, it's bittersweet when we finish a wonderful story. And, oh my, I'm emotional. I'm not trying to be emotional, but I'm emotional. Oh, that was such a beautiful story, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. Of course, all the VODs will be in my playlist, my Storytime playlist. It'll be marked as Storytime, the Night Circus. So if you ever want to revisit any of the stories I've read previously, just look for the Storytime playlists. They will say Storytime and the title of the book. I've already read quite a few stories, did quite a few story times, so, but this one has to be one of my favorites. Oh my goodness, this is definitely one of my favorite stories. I've had this book for quite some time. I never actually read through all of it. I've maybe read through the first couple of chapters. But I'm so glad I was able to finish it today. It's so bittersweet. It really is so bittersweet. But it was such a good story. But, yeah. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. I really do. And next week we'll be starting a new story, and I'm excited. It's always exciting to, as bittersweet as it is to end the story, it's always exciting to start a new one. And I have a few. I have got some books that I read in my childhood. I have some books that are sequels to some that I've already read, and I should continue those. I have a lot of books. I keep a lot of books. So I shall be reading, I guess, a childhood favorite of mine next week. And it'll probably be a lot more of a lighthearted read, a sillier little read, maybe. Not one quite as intense as this story was. This story was quite intense. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Thanks so much for sticking around the story time. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, tomorrow we'll be playing the Crooked Man. I mean, not the Crooked Man. The Boogeyman! We've already played the Crooked Man as part of the Strange Men series, which is also in a playlist along with other games. The Strange Men series has been, so far, one of my favorite to play. Starting with the Crooked Man, and then of course the Sandman, and now we are on the third of the games. And it's the third game of the series, the Boogeyman, which has proven to be silly in terms of its gameplay. But not like funny silly, but like complicated silly. It really makes me look... This is a game that really puts my one brain cell to the test, and God, does it reveal how dumb I am. So hopefully we'll be able to have a little bit more of silly fun time with that game tomorrow. And I hope you all can come and, come and hang out with me and play that game with me as well. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for, for hanging out with me and enjoying the story. I'll see you all tomorrow. So remember, hug your friends, tell someone you love them, and be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world needs more goodness. I love you all so very much, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you guys. Bye!